Hello, I'm Sophia Morrissette. I'm currently a junior at Chapman University in Southern California, majoring in peace studies and psychology. I'm back from a year abroad after studying in Prague last fall and at American University in Washington, D.C. this spring. I spent the summer working for the Washington National Cathedral. I got back last Monday, and I'm here today to share with you all how it went. I talked this time last year about how it's so easy to surround ourselves with other progressives in our liberal bubble. People, regardless of political affiliation, tend to put others in simplistic spaces. We don't tend to want to hear other sides. In general, we have little tolerance for it. So we ostracize the other, however we define that. We have trouble hearing real conversations with people because of who we think they are. I said that I didn't take advantage of that access to others myself during my freshman year in college, and that I wanted to do better as a sophomore abroad. I took a lot of interesting classes this year at 2 different universities. One of my favorites was Jewish Prague. As an ethnic Jew, I'm very interested in learning about Jewish history. I learned about the strong presence of Jews in Prague and the horrors they faced in the 20th century between World War II and the communist takeover. We took a field trip to Terezin, and I took my own trip to Auschwitz, both of which will stay with me forever. My effective activism class at American University this spring is where I learned the importance of clever and fun activism. At the end of the semester, we had to create our own plan for an activism project of our own, which was much harder than I expected. I focused my project on roots that started here at FUS. I wrote up a plan, although I didn't send it anywhere, to convince UUA to expand its OWLS program to give public schools a comprehensive sex education curriculum. Yeah. Thank you. I also enjoyed my foreign policy and international peace and security classes. We had speakers from many different backgrounds and political ideologies, while we also ventured out into DC for conferences at places like the Senate buildings and the U.S. Institute for Peace. My favorite class of all was Nations and Nationalism, which partly inspired my forum talk here in January about authoritarianism, genocide, and narcissistic personality disorder. That was shortly after I returned home from Prague. And boy, did I love Prague. It's a beautiful city. I loved the people of Prague, learning some of the language, the culture, and eating Czech goulash. In a little over 3 months, I also used it as a base to visit 8 countries and 14 cities. In comparing the United States and the Czechs, I found the Czech people to be a bit more tight-lipped and a little more standoffish, but once I got to know them, they were the sweetest people. They're really appreciative of their rich cultural history. They're proud of their folktales and their legends. There was a gap, however. In one of my classes, we visited the Prague Museum, which had a detailed history with thousands of artifacts dating back from the founding of the city in the 9th century. However, the museum mysteriously skipped the timeline of the 20th century, jumping instead to modern-day exhibits. The Czechs don't talk about what they had to endure during the last century. All of my Czech professors lived through the communist era, but never shared with us what it was like. However, they were happy to talk about their country's history before World War II. If you think about it, the United States does the same thing. We either rewrite our history or we obliterate it as if it never existed. My spring semester in DC was part of Chapman's study abroad program as well. I love that city too, and I was very excited to be there. It was there that I became a NeoConservative sympathizer. But not really, don't worry, I haven't changed that much. I just understand how some of them think a little bit more than I did a few months ago. For my foreign policy class, I wrote an essay from the point of view of a neoconservative, persuading my professor how it was the best foreign policy approach. I sent it to my mom to read over. She texted me and asked what cult I had joined. Through that paper, I learned that you can be reasonable on both sides of the political spectrum. It's not that the other side is stupid. Everyone has their own reasons for why they support what they do. Neoconservatives are part of a political ideology that favors interventionist policy, a strong military presence, unilateralist capitalism, and disentanglement from international organizations like the United Nations. Survival to neoconservatives is about the continuance of the country's hegemonic power and the increase in sustainability of democratic nations around the world. They believe it is America's moral obligation to share our beliefs and democratic values with others. So here's a radical thought for you. Neoconservatives are kind of like people in the Peace Corps. And this is coming from someone who wants to join the Peace Corps eventually. Neoconservatives want to be the world's policemen. Why? It's because they want to build stable, sustainable, and peaceful communities and institutions, much like the goals of the Peace Corps. Neoconservative ideology doesn't plan on mobilizing overseas to seed chaos or colonize. The idea is to be wanted, to be invited. For example, the countries of Georgia, Morocco, and Tunisia all wanted help transitioning into some form of democracy. If we have the tools to build a great and powerful nation and a 200-year history to back it up, shouldn't we share that? Neocons truly believe the U.S. has it down. You do have to admit our institutions are pretty stable compared to other nations, and we have relatively low corruption levels according to transparency.org. Neoconservatives want to show others how we do democracy. There's a sincerity to much of the work. They aren't looking to beat nations down. Our Constitution and government continues to be used as a building block for other nations for building their own democracy. Before I wrote a paper about this, I was a pacifist to the core. I thought no resolution requires violence. However, after hearing a variety of guest speakers during the past year, I am still a peace builder who understands the value of a moderated military. Neoconservatives are idealists. That's where neocons and pacifists meet. They both have a utopian vision, just different ways to achieve it. So let me give you an example of someone who I met who strongly identifies as a neoconservative. Let's call him Dave. He was in my DC program at American University. His walls contained a printed photo of Pope John Paul II, not Francis because he thought he was too much of a snowflake, as well as a Trump 2020 re-election flag and a calendar to match, and a black and white photo of Bill Cosby. That should tell you all you need to know about him. I didn't avoid him because I knew I was going to give this talk, and I wanted to give you guys good material. The first conversation we ever had, we got into an argument about welfare. He believes everyone, no matter their background and privilege, can get ahead if they do the right things in school and in work. He said his own brother, who is on welfare, doesn't deserve it because he messed up early on and had a child when he was very young, forcing him to drop out of college. Our conversation got so heated, I had to leave the room. But I ended it by saying, we're only regurgitating the facts from the media we subscribe to, and we're never going to change each other's minds. The only thing we can change is how we perceive one another and understand where we're coming from. I tried to end it on a note of respect, despite the fact that I hate his values and the posters in his room. He actually read my essay about neoconservative ideology. He liked it and suggested I send it to Fox News and Breitbart. I didn't do it. I was also exposed to many speakers of different ideologies who were invited to the classroom by my foreign policy professor. The neoconservative he invited was from the Heritage Foundation, a right-wing think tank that is primarily geared towards public policy and supports Reagan-style policies. I was taken aback at a lot of things that he said, some of which included how the UN Convention of the Rights on the Child was a stupid resolution, that we shouldn't bother solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because it won't get solved in our lifetime, so why waste the energy, and how some countries are more decent than others. The next week, we heard from a pacifist. And to be honest, he angered me more than the Heritage Foundation guy. He came off as ignorant and naive. He provided no plans to achieve his utopian vision of world peace. There were no clear examples to back up his claims. The speaker from the Heritage Foundation at least provided facts and examples from our country's history to back up his claims. Although I thought he was misguided in his conclusions and action plans, he did have facts that were not fake. What this made me think about is how we convey and explain our values is crucial. The ability to be coherent and reasonable, no matter what position you have, is where we can meet in conversation. I agreed with the pacifist about one key thing. We're not taught peace in school. Now, that's not the fault of my teachers. I had amazing social studies and history teachers in high school. But teaching peace is not simply built into the curriculums. I've learned about the Revolutionary Wars, the Cold Wars, World Wars, even about the War of 1812, but not about how we built peace to mediate those wars. As a peace studies major at Chapman, even in those classes, we talk about the wars and the ongoing conflicts our world is engaged in, about the root causes of war and their leaders. All of that is important, but peace is not simply about the absence of war and violence. It's about the prevention of violence. Peace-building measures are used from the local to the global levels. Why aren't those strategies as well known as military strategies and the reasons war starts? Think about the world's peace action takers you know, besides popular figures like Martin Luther King and Gandhi. It was John F. Kennedy who said, "War will exist until that distant day when the conscientious objector enjoys the same reputation and prestige that the warrior does today." Another element of my DC adventure was my internship. I started interning for the Washington National Cathedral at the end of January and was hired on through the summer after my semester ended. Working for the cathedral was a surprise. I remember being dismayed that they were interested in recruiting me. I was standing near their booth at an internship fair, looking to see on the map which organizations I wanted to talk to for a social justice internship. The women at the cathedral invited me over to talk to them. I listened politely, but thought, why would I want to work for a church? I didn't even know what Episcopalians were. How were they different from other Christian religions? FUS is about as churchy as I get. Yet they did woo me in, and it turned out to be a great internship for me. It was the first time I worked at an office from 9 to 5. I survived, and I helped with some cool projects, such as helping to plan and organize the cathedral's new tradition of an annual interfaith service, a Refugee Day festival that included connecting DC residents with refugees in camps around the world through Skype. I worked on a big overhaul of the cathedral's emergency preparedness plan, which was scary knowing that houses of worship are increasingly under attack. Working for the cathedral also made me realize just how important interfaith work is. I've tended to think of religion as a source of conflict and violence and aggression. I've learned how it tears communities apart and how it seems to strengthen the ones that are already strong. But now I know religion and faith can be a great peacemaking tool. In my last few weeks there, the cathedral made some pretty gutsy moves. They took a public stance about Trump's comments about Baltimore and took a stance on guns after the recent series of shootings. I was glad I was around when they took these positions. I had been used to this congregation taking political stances and had been disappointed the cathedral had not been doing more to criticize the injustices that are being directed only a few miles away. But I also understand not having the ability to politicize everything. The cathedral is an open house of faith and non-faith for everyone of all backgrounds and political parties. One of my favorite places in DC was Lafayette Square, right outside the White House. I like this place not for the proximity to the inhabitant of the house, but for the democracy in action in front of it. I loved watching the protests outside. I would sit on a bench nearby for a long time, just taking in the chaos. At any given time, there were 5 protests happening at once. I also met many individuals in the last year who were very interesting to talk to because of their unique perspectives. Like Sophie, who is a 21-year-old engaged to a military guy who loves her guns and the shooting range, and became one of my closest friends in DC over our passion for exploring the city. There was Samantha. We thought alike about political issues, except when it came to her stance against vaccines, which she learned from her father, who was trained as a doctor. I'm changing people's names just to protect their privacy. There was Claire, who is a liberal to the core, but due to her faith as a Christian, is anti-abortion. There's Tom, who said there aren't any good Republicans in Congress. He said anyone who takes healthcare away from people is inherently a bad person. I said that it isn't that black and white. I had a coworker who had many disagreements with me about climate change. He doesn't think it's real. He said if I die prematurely due to climate change, he would pay for my funeral. I also had interesting conversations with my roommate Emily, who's a libertarian. Other than that, she shares the same socially progressive ideologies as I do. We had many conversations about reproductive rights. In true libertarian fashion, she didn't believe it was the government's say or hers to dictate what I do with my body. There was a professor I met at a refugee festival who's concerned about the direction my generation is headed and what he calls fads, such as trigger warnings and being transgender. I didn't shame him for asking me questions. He was genuinely curious about the younger generation. This curiosity and eagerness to learn is what we want more of. I met 2 Italian men while backpacking in Milan. They were General Lee enthusiasts. They randomly stopped me on the street to ask for directions, and it led to a 2-hour conversation. They were fascists and implied that all Americans are generally snowflakes and should suck it up about issues like the Confederate flag. But now we're Facebook friends. A lot of who I am is centered around politics and social justice. I find it difficult to make friends with people who are wholeheartedly conservative. Yet many of the friends I made this year tended to be socially progressive, even if they were not liberals. What I delved deeper into this year with new friendships was to ask why they believe what they do. Is it rooted in the environment they grew up in, their schooling, their parents, their faith? I think in general, we ask a lot of what, but not enough why. I believe everyone's beliefs come from what we've been taught and exposed to. Can we blame others for what they do and do not know? Can we blame ourselves for what we don't know? I believe we can only assign blame when someone isn't actively seeking out more information to educate themselves. To me, that is just laziness. Although not all of us have the luxury of time or endless energy to examine all the issues our society struggles with. I try to give people respect when they take steps to understand an issue, even if I don't agree with what they've concluded. The fact that we call out the Conservative Party for using hateful, vulgar, and aggressive language against people who disagree with them, although very true, is one thing. But I see hypocrisy when we don't call it out on ourselves. I'm not referring here to First Unitarian members, but liberal protesters in El Paso, for example, since the shooting. A woman in a MAGA hat was verbally abused by a crowd who swarmed her as if the 22 dead were her fault. A bystander stepped in to shield her from the abuse and was called a white supremacist as a result, although he was only intervening to protect the woman. We have to recognize that it's not only the people on the right who can be prone to violent protests. It's part of human nature, sadly. We all use aggression and excessive language when we're emotional. I acknowledge that I'm a hypocrite myself, Every time I've been asked to speak here, I largely preached about being more tolerant, but I wasn't putting those words into action. Last year, if you had asked me if it was possible for me to be friends with someone who owned multiple guns, I would have been aghast and told you no. Even in high school, it felt good to be among the political majority. However, this was as a result of essentially shunning conservative students. The liberal students had the power at Southwest High School. The other was grossly outnumbered and didn't feel comfortable sharing their point of view. Now, however, I'm more confident in my ability to say this. I will never be completely tolerant, but I have learned to be, much more so than in previous years. We all want to belong. We all belong to different tribes, and we should not make it our goal to change that. What's important is seeing other tribes as equals, filled with human beings, whether or not we agree with them. I do not believe that re-educating others is our priority. It is a lofty utopian goal to turn somebody. We grow up with a certain rhetoric. It can take double those years to dismantle those closely held values. It's not that it cannot be done, but it shouldn't be the goal when we talk to others about our differing beliefs. I also believe we shouldn't talk about politics all the time anyway, because it drives us insane. There's more to us than our politics, and we lose sight of that. I know I do. Yet we're all just people. We all have fights with friends and significant others. We have troubles and stresses and anxiety over school and work and family. We all have existential dread about finding our path. We're all just people, not positions. So what's next for me? A week from today, I head back to Southern California, road tripping through mostly red and purple states. I'm journeying back to Chapman University for my junior year. Next summer, I'm planning to take the Foreign Service exam. I want to travel to Europe again, including hopefully spending a month working at a refugee camp in Greece. Beyond that, I'm not sure what the future will hold. I guess I hope it consists of having more conversations and maybe coming back next summer to share yet another year of learning. Thank you.